matter the journey that you're on right now, the amount of faith you're holding on to, the question we're asking tonight is how can we hold on to that faith, no matter how big or small, tomorrow or on Tuesday or Wednesday, when life really starts to kick in and things can get a little hard? How can we hold on to our Sunday faith through the week, through our life, when things get difficult? Whether you were celebrating Mother's Day or doing whatever it is you were doing, I hope it was good. I'm grateful for the rain. I'm also grateful for, I have to give a bit of a shout out to someone, they might not like this, but Sophie over here is amazing. She needs a cheer in a second. This morning I was preaching and my button fell off, and she came here tonight with a needle and thread and she put my button back on. So can we please thank Sophie for being amazing? I know it's Mother's Day. I've been very spoiled. It's the highlight of my day right there. So we are in the Certain Faith series. We are ending it tonight. For the last 4 weeks, we have been looking at what it means for us to be able to be certain about what we believe. And if you've been coming along and you're a believer already, I hope that you're leaving this series feeling encouraged and confident and certain of why you can believe what you believe. And if you've maybe been dragged along here tonight or for the last few weeks, maybe you still aren't a believer yet, but that's okay. My hope for you is simply that perhaps you'll leave this series maybe a little less certain of your unbelief, just a little bit of doubt of your doubt maybe. Because even that is actually a small amount of faith, isn't it? And the Bible actually tells us that we don't need a whole lot of faith, because faith the size of a mustard seed, and a mustard seed is pretty small, is actually enough to move mountains. So no matter the journey that you're on right now, the amount of faith you're holding on to, the question we're asking tonight is how can we hold on to that faith, no matter how big or small, tomorrow or on Tuesday or Wednesday, when life really starts to kick in and things can get a little hard? How can we hold on to our Sunday faith through the week, through our life, when things get difficult? Now, I went on a holiday a few years ago now. It was my first overseas holiday, first experience of the snow. And my husband and I, we went to New York and we went to Canada and we went to Whistler. Are there any adrenaline junkies in the room? Oh, wow, only a few. Okay, excellent. Well, I'm someone who wishes I was an adrenaline junkie, but there's probably a really big gap between what I wish I was willing to do and what I can actually do. I'd love to jump out of a plane, but I just know that's never going to happen. But I wanted to do something exciting and fun. So we signed up to do a zip line. And yes, it's a bit of a cheat. It's not as exciting as, jumping out of a plane, but to my credit, it is like 100 meters off the ground and almost like a kilometer across. And that's not me, but that is the zip line that we were on. I had to Google it. But no, I didn't do that, although that would have been fun. So we were really excited about doing this. And then all of a sudden, we make it up there, and I'm standing on the platform, harnessed up, having to launch off, seeing 100 meters of depth beneath me. And I think the next slide shows my face. I was not so excited anymore. I was not so confident. But I did it, and I was glad to say that I did it because I was really enjoying myself. It was quite fast, and it was beautiful. There was snow-capped trees and mountains beneath me. And it's quite a long way, so I still couldn't quite see the end of the zip line where the other people were waiting on the other end. And I noticed that I start to lose speed. I slowed down, and I slowed down so much that I actually stopped and started rolling all the way back into the middle of this almost a kilometer long zip line. And so now I am dangling over a canyon gorge in Canada, just hanging there. And I can't see the people on the other end, and I can't hear them. There's no headpiece or anything. And I was packing it. I didn't know what had happened. Again, that's not me, but it's a pretty accurate representation of what it would have looked like to have me dangling. And I just did not know what had happened. You know, all the thoughts go through your head of like, I don't know, I'm not like an engineer or something, so I'm like, why has this gone wrong? Can this rope continue to hold me while I sit here? How long will I be here? What if it drops? All the things. Now, I'm not going to tell you how that story ends just yet. I'm going to leave you in a little bit of suspense. But obviously, I'm here, so I didn't like fall to my death, so that's good. But the reason I tell this story is because it's a little bit like our experience of faith. Just like there can be a gap between the knowledge and the theory that a rope can hold me and actually being willing to step off the ledge and find out, there can be a gap between the certainty of our faith that we hold to on Sunday and we sing about and we agree with, and the actions that we do Monday through Saturday, or when life gets hard. There can be this gap. Because in theory, it's easy. You know, booking my ticket for the zip line while I was still in Australia with 2 feet on the floor, that was easy. But standing on the platform looking down at the height and the rocks and the crevice and all the terrifying things beneath changes the story a little bit. Our practice shows the true certainty of our faith. And I actually grew up as a pastor's kid, so that meant I was always in church. I memorized lots of Bible verses. I had the theory down pat. But even 34 years now of theory and understanding and even belief, I still experience this gap between what I believe, and I do believe it, and what I go and do when life gets hard. I have this gap. Monday hits. Life gets real, and we learn real quick whether our faith is the theory that we like to sing about on Sundays, or a faith that transforms the way that we live every day of our lives. Now, I'm not saying this for us to feel bad or guilty right now. You might be thinking, oh, Jem, come on, this is not a Mother's Day message. I know this, you don't have to point it out. But the point of it is not to feel bad. This is actually a really normal experience for all of us. This is my story, this is your story. This is what it's like to live a life of faith and experience the transformation of walking with Jesus every day. It's a journey. And it's also not a new problem. And we're in very good company because one of the most certain disciples, Peter, one of Jesus' 12 followers, and he's actually my favorite disciple. I mean, I only have one kid here, so I could probably get away with saying that she was my favorite because the other one's not here. So I don't know if I can say that I have a favorite disciple, but Peter's my favorite disciple because he always starts so well. I call him the ride or die disciple. He is always so passionate and in, but he's also one of the first to bounce when things get really hard. But I love him for this because this is me. This is us. And in Luke chapter 22 and 23, where we are going to be tonight, we see Peter have his very own Sunday versus Monday experience. And it actually exposed a huge gap between what Peter believed and what his actions demonstrated. So we are going to be in Luke 22 and 23, and as if this was a play, we're going to be in 3 acts. And all of these events that we're going to be in tonight are the timeline leading up to the death of Jesus. So we're going to start in the Last Supper, where Jesus was having and breaking bread with his disciples. Later that night, they all move on to the Garden of Gethsemane, which is Act 2, where Jesus is also arrested. When he's arrested, he gets taken to the house of the high priest. And Act 3, tonight we're going to find ourselves in the courtyard outside the house of the high priest. So, Act 1, we are in the Last Supper. And Jesus is explaining what's to come. He knows that he is going to die and be put to death on a cross, and he starts explaining to his disciples what's going to start happening. And he actually says to them that someone there is going to betray him that night. And the disciples, they start bickering and arguing amongst themselves, saying, oh, it couldn't be me, or I reckon it's probably him. And knowing Peter, very, very passionate Peter, I can only imagine that he had a lot to say in this conversation. And I think he did, because when Jesus responds to the disciples, he actually names Peter specifically. And this is what he says to him in verse 31. He says, Simon, Simon. Now, I know that's confusing because we're talking to Peter, but Peter's name was Simon Peter. So Jesus is talking to Peter and he says, Satan has asked to sift all of you as wheat. In other words, Satan has asked to test you. But I have prayed for you, Simon, that your faith may not fail. And when you have turned back, strengthen your brothers. Now, Peter is thinking, when I've turned back, are you kidding me? It's Peter. I'm not going to turn away from you in order to turn back. Like, this isn't happening. And he says to him, Lord, I am ready to go with you to prison and to death. I told you he's ride or die. This is him having his Sunday moment, right? He's in church. He is certain. He is full of faith. But then we come to the garden. Jesus has left the supper and gone to the Garden of Gethsemane, and the disciples have followed him. And Jesus has gone there to pray to his Father because he knows what he is about to walk into. After he prays and he comes back to the disciples, they are all met by the chief priests and the office guards, and they come to arrest Jesus. And now Peter is about to experience his Monday moment. Verse 54, then seizing him, they led him away and took him into the house of the high priest. And Peter followed at a distance. He followed at a distance. It's not quite so ride or die anymore, is it? I can sort of imagine him trying to hide behind a tree now and then. So he's hanging in there, but he is a little less certain. Then we come to the courtyard in Act 3 of our story. Jesus has been taken into the house of the high priest. He's been taken inside. And outside of that house is a courtyard where people who work there and live there are sitting around and having a fire. And Peter, who's been following at a distance, sits down and joins them. And verse 55 says, and when some there had kindled a fire in the middle of the courtyard and had sat down together, Peter sat down with them. A servant girl saw him seated there in the firelight. She looked closely at him and said, this man was with him. In other words, this man was with Jesus. But Peter denied it. Woman, I don't know him, he said. I don't know him? Just hours earlier, he said to Jesus that he would rather die or go to jail than ever turn his back on him. Then we get to the garden, and it's getting a little sketchier. He's following at a distance, so he's losing a little bit of faith, but he's hanging in there. And then we get to the courtyard, and things are looking pretty bleak. And he says he's never even met the man. Talk about a gap between what Peter said he believed and the actions that he demonstrated. Later on in this interaction, he continued to deny Jesus twice more. And when he finally realized what he had done, it says he went outside and wept bitterly. I don't know if this is something you should admit when you're standing on the stage and preaching, but man, I get it. I really feel for Peter in this moment. I think if any one of us were standing on our very own ledge, looking down into the fact that the person he followed and trusted with his whole life is now gone, is probably going to die. Everyone else around him, the disciples who also followed, they've split. They're nowhere to be found. I think if I was looking down into that fear and loneliness and abandonment, I might be just as tempted to step back off the ledge, turn around and walk the other way. And all the theory, the knowledge, the understanding, or even the belief that we hold on to in that moment seems like it just fades away. You might be on your own ledge tonight. You might have been there last week, or I'm sorry to say, you might be there next week. I was 19 when I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease. And by the time I was 24, I was incontinent. So what that meant for me, my youngest daughter was a baby. If I were to go to the grocery shops to buy food, I had to put on an adult diaper. I had to put my daughter in the trolley, walk down one aisle, leave my trolley, walk and run to the bathroom, come back and go down the next aisle. And that happened every aisle. And that's just one illustration of how hard that life was. But on top of that, it was just getting really dangerous to live like that with all the disease and inflammation that was going on. The doctors eventually said that it was time for an intervention that I had never been willing to do. In fact, when I heard about the possibility when I was first diagnosed of this kind of an outcome, I remember turning to my mum and saying, "You can put me in a coffin before you ever see that happen to me." But that's what had to happen. And what that was is I had to have an ileostomy, which is where they remove your whole large bowel and they pull a little piece of your small bowel out through your abdomen, and there's now a bag that sits on my stomach permanently forever, and that's now how my body functions. And just even the trauma of the surgery, this is years ago now, and then having to go straight back into emergency surgery 5 days later because it didn't go well, and the infection, and there's drains everywhere, and I missed my daughter's second birthday. It's almost Christmas, and I finally get home, and then I only end up heading back to the hospital in an ambulance on Christmas Day. And then the months and even the years that preceded that is just getting used to a life of a completely new way of living and your body functioning, and the shame and embarrassment even that can come with all of that. And let me tell you, just like Peter is in his story, there were so many times I was tempted to just step back off that ledge and turn around and walk away. The Sunday faith, the belief which I really did hold, didn't seem to be enough to get me through those moments, not all the time. I wasn't without doubt and fear. So we have seen Peter's experience of these three events and his Monday versus Sunday moment. But there was also another man there, another leading character in the story who also experienced abandonment and doubt and fear, and his name was Jesus. Like Peter, Jesus was also full of faith at the Last Supper. He knew what was coming, but he was still full of faith and certain. And then we get to the garden, and Jesus has his own Monday moment. We read about it when he prays to his Father in the garden. He prays this prayer: "Father, if you are willing, take this cup from me, yet not my will, but yours be done." Jesus is saying, "God, listen, I know we hatched this plan together, and I know it's for a really good cause, but listen, if there's any other way, tell me now, because I can actually turn away and not do this, because I'm actually really not excited about it." But he says, "Not my will, but yours be done." Jesus knows what it is like for us, what it was like for Peter to go through anguish, abandonment, fear. Talk about abandonment. Peter abandoned him, Judas abandoned him, all his disciples abandoned him. People that were cheering in the streets for him a week before, they're now cheering for him to die. He understood rejection. He didn't turn back though. He said, "Not my will, but yours be done." And in chapter 23, Act 4, if you will, he went to the cross and he was crucified. The best part of the story is coming, but let's just sit here for a minute, because both Peter and Jesus were certain in the Last Supper, weren't they? They were both certain and full of faith. Both Peter and Jesus in the garden experienced their own form of doubt and fear. So what happened differently that Jesus remains and stepped off of a ledge that led him to the cross, but Peter stepped off, turned around, and walked away? Now, I can feel some of you thinking, well, duh, it's because he's Jesus. And yes, he's Jesus. But he was also fully human and fully terrified. We see that in his prayer. Peter's doubt led him to create distance, which enabled him to turn away and eventually give up. But Jesus' doubt led him to cry out to his Father, which is the opposite of distance that creates intimacy, enabled him to turn towards the Father and give in. There is a difference between giving up and giving in. Jesus chose to trust his Father that he knew to be good and kind and loving and trustworthy, even when things didn't always make sense. We don't become more certain in our faith because we know enough or understand enough or go to Sunday school or sing loudly or even hear great messages on certain faith. We become more certain in our faith when we step off the ledge and experience our Father's arms catching us. Trust is built through surrendering your whole self to our Father time and time again, and learning time and time again that he is trustworthy. Do you want to know just how trustworthy he is? Well, I'm going to tell you. I know some of you have been a little distracted tonight because you're still wondering about poor Jem in the middle of Canada hanging off a zip line. How did she get down? Well, hanging on a zip line in Canada, in the distance, I see a figure coming towards me, monkey gripping his way out to me, his own upper body strength. If I was single, it might have been a sight. I'm not, so it isn't. He monkey grips his way out to me. He attaches my harness to his, and he monkey grips us all the way back. Are you starting to see what I'm trying to say? The beauty is that while we are like Peter and we can turn away, Jesus is always Jesus. His character never changes. And just like he turned toward his Father, he turns towards us and he monkey grips his way to us. He belays us to himself and takes us all the way back to safety. But he didn't just come halfway. He went the whole way by dying on a cross. And what kept him on that cross, when we know he could have called himself down because he was still fully God? His love for you. His passion for you. To have a relationship with you and close the gap that our sin creates and pull us safely back across the ravine. He has proven to be good and to be loving and to be worth trusting. And I have seen it every day of my life, even when things didn't always make sense. So I said the best part was coming. Act 5. Jesus rose from the dead. I know it sounds insane, but it's the truth. And we have hundreds of eyewitness accounts that actually saw it with their very eyes. And we have believed historical events for a whole lot less than that. So Jesus has risen, but where is Peter? When Peter heard news that Jesus was alive again, what do you think that he did? It says he ran. He ran to the tomb to find Jesus. He ran to the tomb. This is our Peter that we know and love back. This is ride or die Peter. This is starts well Peter. The rest of the disciples who were with him, they didn't believe what they heard, but Peter runs to see Jesus. And I think we might have some Peters here tonight who have experienced some really hard things that's caused them to create some distance from their Father. But it's time to run back to the tomb and find it empty, that Jesus is alive, that you are forgiven, that he wants to restore you, that he wants to bring you back into relationship with him, that he's not sitting there counting your wrongs, that he's not tut-tutting as maybe a father or a mother figure has done to you in your life. He is simply waiting with open arms because he wants you to cry out to him as he cried out to his Father. He's just waiting. And I think there might be some other people here tonight that you are standing on a ledge, a zipline ledge. You're experiencing a Monday moment. You've got 2 hands on the rails and 2 feet firmly on the floor, and you've never stepped off and trusted a good and loving and faithful Father. But God is asking you to step off that ledge tonight and to see, by finding out, by action, that he will catch you. And you might have 1 foot on that ledge and you might have 1 foot off, and you might be constantly flirting with the idea of fully trusting God but still holding back and depending on yourself. And he's also asking you to take the leap and step off and surrender to him. Give in to him because he loves you, because he has good plans for you, to prosper you and not to harm you, to give you a hope and a future. He is not the figure that we have in our minds when we have experienced distrust from authority. He is the opposite of that. He is the anti of that. He hates that. He is asking his children to come into his arms, to be found safe and caught and loved and named and known and secure. Does that sound like something you want? Do you want to be named and known and loved and secure? I know I do.
Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed that. If you did and you want more Lifepoint content, subscribe to our channel right now. Or if you're in the area around Moreton Bay or Rothwell, head to our service. Sunday, we'd love to see you there. lifepoint.org.au for all the details. We'll see you soon.